The ridiculousness coming out of the United States Navy right now is at a crescendo I can barely tolerate. Not only, just a matter of months ago, they issue some report sliming the entire 7th Fleet as fatigued, unmotivated, poorly trained, unaware of coal regs, deficient. I mean, all of the words that you could possibly imagine to describe a fleet that is unprepared for the challenges it faces. Then, literally almost the same week that they issue that report, they announce that they are going to engage in something that the U.S. Navy has never before done. They took 3 entire aircraft carrier groups, battle groups, and put them in joint operations. A very, as they described it, complex maneuver. And I covered this in another video. Would you do that? If you had a group of people that you were supervising that, in any place, in the private sector or anywhere else, that you felt were substandard and deficient in their ability to do the very basic fundamental things required for their job description, would you then challenge them to do something that that particular group of people had never done before, where lives were at stake? Of course you wouldn't. You absolutely would not. And now, the Admiral, stating clearly that only a matter of months ago that there is a giant training deficiency in that fleet, now thinks that they should not only train their own people, they should operate it simultaneously. Do force generation, really? A fleet that can't even operate its ships, according to you, properly, without there being risk of collision, risk of fatigue, risk of deficient operation, where a 2.7 knot current causes a steering casualty aboard the McCain. It's ridiculous in the extreme. It argues with logic. And here's the thing, guys. You don't even have to go to my videos to see this. You don't even have to have watched one video from the Florida Maquis. All you would have needed to do is read the reports. The preliminary and the final one. Now, before we get there, yesterday I had mentioned that there was this near miss in May. And it wasn't in the report. I've actually found it in the report. It was just at a place where I wasn't looking. But it's also been, strangely enough, acknowledged in this article, Post-Crescent. We'll go down here. It's almost all the way down to the bottom where they talk about this. And let's see if I can find it here. Here it is. The Fitzgerald itself also had a near miss with another ship barely a month before the deadly collision. The ship, then under Commanding Officer Robert Shue, nearly struck a commercial vessel while approaching Sasebo, Japan in mid-May, said Commander Bill Speaks, a Navy spokesman. The later investigation said there was no effort to determine causes and take corrective action after that incident. Isn't that strange? I wonder if they're going to go back to Commander Shue now, and they're going to charge him with 300 counts of attempted homicide. Because clearly, I mean, they're going to charge these captains now with negligent homicide because of the 7 deaths. You know, and then maybe they're going to, cook up 293 other counts of attempted for their... It's just ridiculous. I mean, it's beyond... And even there's been Navy admirals that have done stories on this. How absolutely inane and stupid that it is that they are attempting to criminally charge a man who was asleep and who had only been in charge of the ship for a month, having left orders that allegedly weren't followed. I mean, they could, seriously, if this is going to be the new standard, imagine the charges that you could dig up if you decided you wanted to go after the command of Fort Hood for the Nadal Hassan shooting. All of the negligent homicide charges that you could get on everybody that missed that. And that wasn't an accident. That was criminal. But anyway, the statement about only having to look at the reports. This is the preliminary. Now, this was 11 August. This was 2 months after. Guys, at this point, the Navy was going to know everything they were going to know about this accident. This was prior to the McCain. 1. In reference, I directed additional investigation into the damage control and life-saving efforts of the crew of the USS Fitzgerald. Following the collision that occurred on 17 June 2017, my review of the additional findings confirmed my original determination that the injuries to the 3 surviving service members, and this would include the captain, and the deaths of the 7 sailors occurred in the line of duty and not due to misconduct. Okay, and I know down here it says the investigation directed in reference was limited to the events that occurred after the collision. Other ongoing investigations address events that occurred prior to. But wouldn't negligent homicide be a form of misconduct? And wouldn't the deaths of the 7 sailors be a direct result of the actions prior to? It just argues with itself in ways that you can't even explain. I mean, if you're going to accept this idea of it just being an unfortunate accident as a result of poor training, what that would say is that they're not taking anything that would have possibly been going on aboard the ACX Crystal, or possibly a third party spoofing those signals, as relevant. Because here's something else that is in the, well, I'll just talk about it and not try to explain it. This, of course, is the timeline, but if you go up to the top of the timeline here, and it talks about the findings, it talks about watchstanders performing physical lookout duties did so only on Fitzgerald's left port side, not on the right starboard side, where the 3 ships were present with risk of collision. Really? When you go down to their timeline, let me read this. 0120, the watchstander responsible for the immediate support to the officer of the deck, the junior officer of the deck, reported sighting Crystal visually. Crystal was on the starboard side and noted that Crystal's course would cross Fitzgerald's track. The officer of the deck continued to think that Crystal would pass at 1,500 yards from Fitzgerald. That means there's at least one watchstander prior to the accident who was looking starboard. Junior officer of the deck sighted Crystal again and made the recommendation to slow, but it also says up there that they didn't attempt to inform the commanding officer, and I'll go back to that here in a second. Now listen to this, 0125. Crystal was approaching Fitzgerald from the starboard side at 3 nautical miles. Fitzgerald watchstanders at this time held 2 other commercial vessels in addition to Crystal. That means physical watchstanders aboard the Fitzgerald were absolutely doing so on the starboard side. Now, as far as this not recommending to officers and not passing things up the chain, let me see if I can find that up here. In several instances, individual members of the watch teams identified incorrect information or mistakes by others, yet failed to proactively and forcibly take corrective action or otherwise highlight or communicate their individual concerns. He absolutely did. At 2 different places in their timeline do they describe watchstanders performing physical lookout duties on the starboard side, but up here, they say they didn't do it at all. How do you jive those 2 things? The junior officer of the deck is having reported as saying, please slow. That's a corrective action. He said, we have this visual problem. I know what the radar is stating. I get that. But here is our visual issue. We had guys who knew what the fuck they were doing. We had guys who knew what their job was. The problem, and the other thing too up here about this AIS nonsense, where they said that they didn't use the AIS. Yeah, here it is. Did not utilize the automated identification system. This system provides real-time updates of commercial ship positions through use of the global positioning system. I'll learn to speak English one of these days, I promise. In this case, we have described and shown, based on the information from Vessel Finder, that the ACX Crystal was using a Class B transponder. At that range, they would have not received a Class B transponder signal. Those Class B transponder signals run at 2 amp, and they're only meant for pleasure craft and in small areas less than 2 or 3 miles away. And either way, it wouldn't matter if they were even transmitting theirs. Why? Because the captain of the ACX Crystal said he was already in visual contact of the destroyer, knew exactly where it was attempting to contact it, flashing his lights at it, blowing the horn, all sorts of things, and attempted to take corrective action 10 minutes prior. If he attempted to take corrective action 10 minutes prior, that means he was aware even before that. And I don't know how you can ever say that it's not relevant what happened aboard the ACX Crystal. It is incredibly relevant what happened aboard the ACX Crystal. Because they changed directions twice to intercept the Fitzgerald. It's not like there were a bunch of buoys out there, just static buoys, and that the Fitzgerald, because it didn't know how to operate its ship, couldn't avoid the buoys. It's beyond belief. It's just beyond anything that anyone could ever see as rational. And like I said, I've just showed you what's in the reports. We don't have to talk about submarines. We don't have to talk about EMP mines. We don't have to talk about submarine cables. I mean, the idea that the USS Fitzgerald might have been on a mission tracking those cables, attempting to identify a Russian submarine that we know exists, that the British have even warned us is out, attempting to tap and intercept these cables, might have been part of the equation. That maybe the Fitzgerald had tracked this exact line, this 190 to 240, where the cable goes, many, 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 many times, and made their movements very predictable. And because of that predictable movement, maybe someone was able to say, hey, not only do we know where this ship is, when it's going to be there, we know exactly where it's going to turn and why it's doing it. And as far as this thing goes with the canal, and I'll leave the video here, if you don't think it's relevant, I think this guy thinks it's very relevant, and here's why. Because basically what he's stating here is that the allegation is there's an East Coast standard and a West Coast standard for training in the Navy. And that he believes that's not the case, and that they need to have a specific training center for themselves because they operate in a different way. It's not that the standard is less, it's the standard is different. But if there were ever to be an issue with the Panama Canal and our Navy would basically be cut into two, what that would mean is that you would need to have the ability to train and operate forces independently of each other. And sorry about all the interruptions here, but the issue with the canal is this, and I want you guys to think about this and think about it in a very critical way. If the people in Panama were to decide that they were going to ally with the Chinese or the Russians, and maybe not even have a shot fired, because the Venezuelans are already operating the tugboats that move the ships through the canal. Think of it this way. Let's say the Panamanians come to the Americans and say, you know what, America? We have been reading this report that you've just put out that states that your Navy is not quite up to snuff on coal regs. And because of fatigue issues and because of training issues, that the very basic fundamentals of operating your Navy ships have seemed to elude you. Well, the Panama Canal is a very, very critical resource to the entire world, and in order for your ships to be allowed to pass through, we are going to have to increase the insurance rates that we charge. Or because our insurance is higher, because your ships are clearly more of a risk than an average ship, we're going to have to charge the U.S. more for every ship that goes through. Oh, and by the way, since you've also stated that your crews are a little substandard when it comes to operating, we cannot risk them damaging the canal or, causing some kind of a problem. So what we're going to have to do is we're going to have independent UN naval forces board your vessels and be in control of them prior to and during the entire transit through the canal for safety reasons. I mean, and you can understand that based on your own report. I mean, we wouldn't want the world to have to suffer for another naval mishap like this that's already cost you the lives of 17 of your own sailors. So that's what our new standard is going to be. If you want to take a ship through the canal, it's going to cost you a lot more. And we're going to have foreign naval forces, probably Russian or Chinese, since they're really, really good at operating ships, aboard your vessels with access to the engine room and access to the bridge and the CIC, just to be absolutely sure that passing through the canal is a safe and profitable venture for everyone involved, and we hope you understand that. I want you to think about that. These geniuses who put out this report. They've already decided, now that they're going to broadcast AIS 24/7 and show exactly where we are at all times, being tracked on Twitter. Consequences of actions. Anyway, I will leave it there. Like, share, subscribe. Thank you so much. Little news of note. Jennifer Hammonds has been in contact with the father of Xavier Martin. And it's not for sure yet. It's tentative. But they are actually planning a live interview and possibly a trip to Pascagoula, Mississippi, where they might be talking about these issues where the Fitzgerald is at the moment. So, keep your fingers crossed that all works out. Like, share, subscribe, and we will see you next time. Thank you.